Well, let's now speak to my next guest, who joins me live in the studio here at TRT World. His name is Sami Hamdi, and he's the editor of International Interest, a current affairs magazine on focusing Middle East political risk consultancy. Welcome to the programme. France has been involved in airstrikes, as we've seen, in the Middle East. Do you think this is a retaliatory attack?
Well, first of all, I just want to emphasize that the belief that ISIS somehow traveled 2,000 miles to France to commit the attack is quite absurd. Rather, we should see this as more of a lone wolf who is inspired by ISIS's activities. France is, of course, heavily involved in the Middle East, in Mali, in Libya, in Tunisia, in Algeria, in Syria, in Saudi Arabia, and the like. So, in terms of retaliatory attack, most likely, most probably.
No one has claimed responsibility for this. However, this individual, we don't know, probably had mental health issues or may well be a Daesh sympathiser. That is yet to be found out. The suspect was known to authorities as a criminal. A lot of questions still need to be answered. Do you think that the French authorities could have done more to try and save the 84 people who died?
Well, France was in a state of emergency. This guy was known to the authorities. He had a criminal record. How he escaped the authorities and able to commit these atrocities, questions do need to be asked about the French internal security forces, security services. In terms of the recent spate of attacks, that's 3 in the last 18 months. If the French security services in a country such as France are unable to look after their domestic security, then very, very serious questions have to be asked.
In terms of the rhetoric that is coming out, not just from France itself, but from world leaders, François Hollande has been using language. Are you worried that it's inflammatory at all?
There is no doubt that the language used by François Hollande today is very, very inflammatory. Mainly because I understand the situation. I'm not trying to politicize deaths. But to say that France is under threat from Islamic terrorism is an alienating term to the Muslim population in France and indeed across Europe. John Kerry making a minute's silence during his visit to Vladimir Putin is the same thing. Because at the end of the day, François Hollande, it's as if he is picturing this ISIS against the West. When in reality, and I'm not here to politicize the deaths or to make comparison between people's lives, the victims of ISIS, the large victims of ISIS, the majority of the victims of ISIS are in Mali, are in Ataturk Airport in Istanbul, are in Qatif in Saudi Arabia, are in Medina, the Islamic holy city that ISIS bombed, in Karada in Iraq. The fact of the matter is over 90% of the victims of ISIS are Muslims. So François Hollande today to claim that France is under threat from Islamic terrorism is completely wrong. It's like saying that the Ku Klux Klan are representative of Christianity, that there is Christian terrorism that we need to be wary of. So I think that François Hollande, whether it's to boost his popularity ratings that are falling down, whether it's to get maximum political gain from this particular atrocity, I think, to be honest, that he's mishandled this, particularly in France, which has a large Muslim population, and I think there needs to be a realignment of the narrative that the main victims of ISIS are Muslims. The main victims of ISIS is not Europe, is not the US.
How important is it then for Muslim community leaders and the Muslim population within France to come out and vocally condemn what has happened in order to safeguard and strengthen ties within the communities?
Your question assumes that the Muslim leaders have not already come out and condemned ISIS since its inception. ISIS has been condemned non-stop by every single religious leader.
About this particular attack?
Even this particular attack, Muslim leaders condemned the 2 attacks before in France. They condemned the Brussels attacks. They condemned July 7th before ISIS even came out.
But unfortunately, they are fighting a losing battle here. It is always important to condemn an act of terror, regardless of who it stems from. Surely.
No, definitely, 100%, and they should. But also, the responsibility is not solely on these Muslim leaders. It's on the likes of François Hollande.
No one's saying it's solely on them, but it's important to be able to build strengthen communities, as well as strengthen communities with the politicians. You need to have dialogue.
I agree 100%, and the dialogue at this moment in time, sadly, it seems François Hollande's speech is coming from one way, which is coming from the Muslim leaders to say, look, France, Belgium, UK, whatever, this doesn't belong to Islam. And then you have the various different presidents like François Hollande coming out and saying, okay, we accept it, and then the next day saying, no, but it is an Islamic terrorism. Or David Cameron saying, no, but Islam has to make itself innocent of these atrocities. The Muslim leaders are saying it. You need to acknowledge it.
I think the politicians have very clearly said that it is a small minority of people who have nothing to do with the vast majority of Muslims. However, my argument to you was, is it not important in order for the Muslim population to feel safe and welcomed, because we're seeing a rise in the far right and extremism, for them too to be vocal by saying nothing, it doesn't do their cause any good.
But again, once again, you're assuming that the Muslim leaders haven't said anything. They are saying, and they've talked about Nice, they've said that Nice is an atrocity. After saying it, Francois Hollande has come out and said that France is under threat. He said France, the nation as a whole, is under threat from Islamic terrorism. Essentially what he's done, he's taken all the efforts from the Muslim community leaders and essentially thrown it out the window. Because now when the French person, who's probably never met a Muslim in his life in some remote village in wherever, near Paris or Lyon or whatever, opens his TV and he sees a lunatic, a disgraceful, despicable lunatic, conducting a terrorist act against French citizens. Maybe he has a beard, they claim he's Muslim, they claim whatever, that he's tied to ISIS. That person only hears what Francois Hollande is saying. They're not hearing what the Muslim leaders are saying. The dialogue is, at this moment, is one way. The Muslim leaders are saying to the leaders and saying to the media, Islam has nothing to do with these terrorist attacks. The politicians are turning around and saying, behind doors, they're saying, okay, we know Islam has nothing to do with it. Then they get in front of the cameras and say, Islam has everything to do with it. Francois Hollande is saying this is Islamic terrorism. The fact of the matter is, Francois Hollande today has arguably done more damage to the security of France than ISIS could possibly do.
Okay, well then what would you like Francois Hollande to do in order to move forward and try and rectify this rhetoric that he's used?
Let's look at what they've done in the past, and I'll tell you what they should have done.
No, let's look at what he needs to do now.
Because in Brussels, they increased the airstrikes on Syria. For example, in Brussels, they increased the airstrikes, they intensified it. John Kerry today is saying that we need to up the ante on terrorism.
Those airstrikes were increased because those men involved were proved to be linked to Daesh.
Exactly. So they've increased the airstrikes instead of striving for a genuine political solution to find a resolution in Syria.
Peace talks are currently ongoing with John Kerry and his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov. There is the Syrian opposition currently trying to negotiate a cessation of hostilities. How can you say that those peace talks aren't working?
Because quite simply, because the Syrian peace talks is not solely isolated within Syria. The peace talks in Syria will come about when the US and Russia find an agreement on Ukraine, when the US and Russia find an agreement on Iran, when the US and Russia find an agreement in terms of this oil crisis, when the US and Russia find an agreement on the sanctions.
We realise politics is not going to be solved around a table in one day. But there are steps, positive steps being made. However, for France to carry out airstrikes as a result of what happened, it was to target Daesh. And those people who were involved in the Paris attacks and in the Brussels attacks had known links. We do not know who this individual was linked to, whether he was working alone. That we have to wait to find out.
France could increase its airstrikes on Syria. At the same time, it cracked down on its own Muslim population. At the same time, it introduced draconian measures via the state of emergency on their domestic Muslim population.
So what do you want France to do?
What France has to do is France has to come out with a rhetoric that clearly says that it accepts that Islam has nothing to do with terrorism. It has to say that my Muslim population within France has nothing to do with ISIS, that ISIS is a threat to humanity, it's a threat to Islam, it's a threat to the Muslims in France as well. France has to acknowledge publicly that the majority of the victims of ISIS are not just the Europeans, but the majority are the Turks, are the Arabs, and other Africans involved in Mali as well. When France can acknowledge this dialogue, at that time, those who are sympathizers, let's be realistic, those who are sympathizers won't be pushed off the edge. At this moment in time, the rhetoric from the European leaders is fuel for ISIS soldiers. It's for ISIS to say, look, they don't want you in Europe. They hate you in Europe. They want you to get out of their country. They believe this is an all-white land only for all French people. And when you see Francois Hollande on the other side, the Muslims are being pushed from either side. You have ISIS from here telling them, you are infidels and whatnot if you don't join us. And then you have Francois Hollande and the other president saying, you have to prove your citizenship to this country.
Okay, what about other Middle Eastern leaders coming out and also condemning the attacks? That would be more beneficial. We saw a big attack happen recently in Saudi Arabia.
The problem with condemning the attacks, from expecting the Arab leaders to condemn the attacks, and to be honest, I don't want to be the one to say this, but I'm forced to only because of the reality of the situation. When you have the Eiffel Tower lit up in French flag colours and Wembley Stadium here in the UK and all these other landmarks around the world for France, for Belgium, for whatever other countries, when Turkey Ataturk airport is attacked by ISIS and none of these landmarks raise the Turkish flag, when Karada, more than 250 people killed by ISIS incessant terrorist attacks in Baghdad for over 10 years, and not a single landmark has the Iraqi flag. When Saudi Arabia, when the Islamic holy city of Medina is bombed and attacked, and no Saudi Arabia flag is on any of these landmarks, let's be honest here. You want the Arabs to condemn the attacks, and they should, I agree, 100%. But let's deal with each other as equals.
What does lighting up the Eiffel Tower have to do with condemning terrorism?
I tell you what it has to do with condemning terrorism. Lighting up the Eiffel Tower, what it does, it means that the people who died are very valuable. Their blood is very valuable to us.
All human beings are
All
valuable,
human
aren't
beings
they?
are very valuable. Exactly. So how do I explain to the Turk who got killed in Ataturk airport? He says, I have nothing to do with ISIS. ISIS bombed my country and bombed my airport and bombed Ataturk airport, and they are bombing Turkish positions. What do you say to the Turk all of a sudden when the same thing happens in France and the world has a 1 minute silence like John Kerry in Russia?
It's a sign of respect, though. What is your point?
It's a sign of respect, exactly. The fact of the matter is this. When the Arab leaders are coming out to condemn the attacks in France and the like, the Arabs also want the Europeans to condemn the attacks that are going on in Iraq.
But they have done.
No, but also to respect. You said it's a sign of respect. If that's a sign of respect, where's the sign of respect for the other side?
Each country has their own prerogative of how they want to mark an event or tragic event that has happened. If Turkey decided not to light up, for example, the Blue Mosque or whatever it is, that is up to the president and the government to decide how they want to handle that. How Francois Hollande or how our now Prime Minister Theresa May or former Prime Minister David Cameron decides to handle a terrorist event is their prerogative.
But you hit the nail on the head with your previous question when you said to me that they are trying to show respect. Therefore, when they don't...
It's a mark of respect.
It's a mark of respect. It's a mark of respect that they did for France. It's a mark of respect they did for Belgium. It's a mark of respect that they did for the other European countries
Because it happened in their country.
So what... No, it didn't happen in... What happened in Belgium didn't happen in France.
No, I'm saying the Eiffel Tower being lit up is a mark of respect. It is a landmark. It is seen as something that is wholly nationalistic to French people. And it doesn't matter what your religion is. And they're saying we are lighting this in memory and in tribute of all of the people who died, which included Muslim people in that crowd, to pay their respects. If Turkey chose not to light up a national monument, it's their prerogative.
No, you misunderstood my point. France didn't just lit up the French flag. The other countries lit up their other nation's flag, not just their own nation's flag. Their own nation's flag is understandable. When you're lighting another nation's flag to show your solidarity against terrorism, that's applaudable, 100%. Everybody agrees with it. But when you're saying now, is it on the Arab leaders to condemn what happened in Nice? The Arab leaders are condemning what happened in Nice. The Arabs every single day condemn all the terrorist attacks that take place in their country and outside their country.
The attacks have only just happened, and we're only still getting reactions throughout the world.
Even the previous events. The fact of the matter is this. When it happens in France, the reaction is far different than when it happens in Baghdad. When it happens in Brussels, the reaction is far different than when it happens in Istanbul and Ataturk airport. What I'm saying is this.
Let me ask you another question then. When it happens in Baghdad, and not that this is any excuse at all, but Iraq has been plagued by a huge amount of turmoil for many decades, as has Turkey. It's fighting its own civil war, and it has been doing for decades. When something like this happens in France, the reason why there is so much shock is because it's a complete anomaly. It is not something that the people are used to. It's not something that they've lived with. Not that I'm saying it's justified in Iraq or in Turkey, but it becomes more shocking. Your last answer, please.
Turkey, before the breakdown of the peace talks between the government and the Kurds, when did you hear of a bomb or a suicide bombing taking place in Turkey? Turkey, since 2001, since the AKP came to power, has been very secure. And that's reflected in the huge numbers of investment that's been put into Turkey, the huge amount of FDI...
How can you say it's been very secure? We've had 6 terror attacks this year.
6 terror attacks this year, I said prior to the breakdown of the peace talks. So prior to the breakdown of the peace talks with the Kurds...
OK. Sami Hamdi, we're running out of time. Your last thoughts, please, in a sentence.
My last thoughts are this. What happened is an atrocity. It is disgraceful. But I ask President Francois Hollande to not use this event for political gain, to revise the rhetoric used in the speech, particularly with regards to Islamic terrorism, and that terrorism has no religion. Not Islam, not Christianity, not Judaism, no nothing. Humanity is against terrorism. ISIS is a disease that needs to be purged, and every single nation should contribute to that. And we should tell our politicians, ISIS is not a tool by which to gain political benefit. Okay. We must bring the community together.
Sami Hamdi, we have to leave it there. Thank you
very much.